What's going on, guys? It's Fight Season MMA, and today I want to make a video talking about one fighter in each division who will become UFC champion before they are retired. This video kind of came up because I am seeing so many really good prospects in the UFC coming up, not necessarily young guys, but some individuals who I truly think will go out there and become UFC champion before their career is done. So many different fighters. They don't necessarily have to be at the top of their division or ranked necessarily, but all these guys that I want to talk about today might be some of the dark horses in the division, might be some very surging contenders, or might have a very difficult fighting style to go out there and defeat. So really, I want to talk about one fighter in each UFC division that I believe is going to become UFC champion prior to them wrapping up their career. If you guys enjoy the UFC content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That is the best way to help the channel grow. And while you're down there, please tell me what videos you want to see in the near future, because that definitely helps out me kind of make content and guide everything going forward. But thank you guys for so much support over the past couple of weeks, me being back on YouTube, and let's jump right into the video talking about each UFC fighter, one fighter from each division that I believe will become UFC champion before wrapping it up. Starting in the UFC Flyweight division, I'm going to go Mr. Tatsuro Taira, and Taira looked really good in his last fight against Jung Sung Park, submitting him in the second round. Now, Taira's only loss in the UFC is to Brandon Royval, who is actually a friend of mine. I love Brandon, but Taira is such a good fighter, and genuinely, I cannot wait to see him fight these guys in the upper part of the UFC Flyweight division. Like I said, his one fight in that upper part was against Royval, and a very close decision win for him, but Taira's got some of the best grappling and jiu-jitsu in the Flyweight division currently, and I do think that a lot of guys in that top part would be favorable matchups for Taira, someone like Amir Albazi. I do think he could beat Brandon Moreno. I don't know if he could beat someone like Joshua Van or Royval, considering that he already lost to, and obviously Pantoja's on a different level, but I do think that Taira has the skills, him being such a big fighter for the UFC Flyweight division, and also being such an interesting fighting style for a lot of these guys to go out there and, fight, defeat, and really go out there and him progress his career by. I think Taira has all the skills to become UFC champion. I don't want to sit here and say that he can beat Alexandre Pantoja, but I do think that he can go out there and give Pantoja a very good fight. And I do think that he's the next generation of UFC fighter. He's still really young. I believe he's about 24, 25, or 26 years old. So Taira's got a very prosperous UFC career ahead of him, and I genuinely think Taira could become a UFC champion in the very near future once Pantoja retires or he loses his step as the Flyweight champion. In the UFC Bantamweight division, there's not really someone who I want to talk about other than Umar Nurmagomedov. I think Umar is destined to become a champion. He's the late great cousin of Khabib Nurmagomedov, and he just lost his first fight in the UFC Bantamweight title at UFC 311 in January of this year. To Merab Dvalishvili, and Umar Nurmagomedov was easily Merab's toughest test in the UFC so far. I mean, I believe Merab has lost at the early part of his UFC career, but Merab lately is on a different level. Umar has a Taekwondo background and genuinely is one of the best strikers coming from that Dagestan camp. And genuinely as well, he's an amazing wrestler, beat Corey Sanding, and who's a very good fighter and one of my top favorite fighters inside the UFC Bantamweight division. But I do think that Umar Nurmagomedov has all the skills to go out there and become champion one day. Now, I don't think anyone's going to beat Merab Dvalishvili soon, but Umar's career is still very young, and he has a lot of stuff to really go out there and continue with in the near future. I do think that Umar Nurmagomedov has all the skills, the striking, the grappling, the IQ. The only thing that he needs to improve on, and not really improve on, I think it's just fight someone else, is that cardio. Whenever you fight Merab, who has the greatest cardio in UFC history, you're going to get drowned, and that's just a hard stylistic fight for any single person out there. But ultimately, I do think that Umar Nurmagomedov will become a champion at some point in his UFC career. Now, I do, like I've said, Merab is ruling the division, but I do think that Umar, with those crafty kicks and great camp and Khabib being his coach, amazing takedowns, good Brazilian jiu-jitsu, submission skills, and just power beyond belief, I do think that Umar Nurmagomedov is going to become a UFC champion. Inside the UFC Featherweight division, I got Mr. Lord John Silva. Silva's last fight was against Bryce Mitchell at UFC 314, and he is main eventing a fight night card for UFC Noche in San Antonio, Texas, against the man Diego Lopez. And guess what? Jean Silva's an absolute dog. Ninja choking Bryce Mitchell in that one, beating Melsik Bagdasaryan in February in Seattle, Washington. He's had some absolutely crazy fights, moving up to beat Drew Dober a weight class above on 2 weeks' notice. Jean Silva is an animal, and he is one of the best fighters, honestly, in the UFC featherweight division right now. And I do think that he could beat Volkanovski at this point in time. Now, I do think that he needs to prove him against someone like Diego Lopez, who is at the top part of the UFC featherweight division, former title challenger, fought on the same card as Jean Silva. Great timeline to go up with. But I do think that Mr. Jean Silva is going to become a UFC champion one day. He is so good, so technically sound, always goes for the knockout, heavy hands, great takedown defense, great submission skills. If anyone thought that he was going to beat Bryce Mitchell, it was going to be from the striking and knocking Mitchell out. He went out there and proceeded to submit that man on top of putting on a striking clinic. Jean Silva has everything that you could put in there for a UFC featherweight fighter. I don't want to go and say that he could beat someone like Ilia Topuria if he moved back down, but Jean Silva has the power, he has the grappling, he has just the style to go out there and beat the greatest featherweights on planet Earth right now. I think if he fought Alexander Volkanovski, I would favor Jean Silva a tiny bit, just because Volk's chin isn't amazing. We saw him get dropped by Diego Lopez, knocked out by Ilia Topuria, and Islam Makhachev, but Jean Silva is one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC, carries such a big weight on him with that Fighting Nerds camp, honestly probably being one of the best Fighting Nerds to come out of that camp, and genuinely Jean Silva is an absolute dog and I believe will become a UFC featherweight champion one day. In the UFC lightweight division, there isn't someone who I really want to talk about down the board. I mean, I was thinking about talking about Mauricio Rufi, but I do think that his grappling discrepancies that I haven't seen quite yet are something that's going to lean me to talk about Arman Tsarukyan. Now, Arman is the #1 contender inside the UFC featherweight division. I do think that Arman is easily Ilia Topuria's toughest fight currently, besides someone like Islam Makhachev, because he's proven. But Arman Tsarukyan is so good, has a great chin, great wrestling, great grappling. And I don't want to say would beat Topuria, because I would still favor him in that fight. But Arman Tsarukyan has all the different characteristics to go in there and beat someone like Ilia Topuria. Arman's got a great striking game, knocking out Beneil Dariush at that UFC Austin main event a couple years ago, beating Charles Oliveira in the next one, and then missing weight due to a back injury against his title shot at UFC 311 against Islam Makhachev. But genuinely, Arman Tsarukyan is one of the most well-rounded fighters inside the UFC. He's working with Khamzat Chimaev, who just beat the Dricus du Plessis for the belt, one of the best grapplers in UFC history. And genuinely, I look at Arman Tsarukyan, and I see that he has all the materials to go out there and become UFC champion. I see Arman Tsarukyan being every single person in the top 10 of the UFC lightweight division, and I genuinely think his toughest fights are Islam Makhachev, who's moving up to welterweight, and Ilia Topuria, who is the champion, but is a little bit smaller, being a former featherweight in there. So I do think that Arman Tsarukyan has all the tools to become a UFC featherweight, UFC lightweight division, and depending on how long he stays around inside the UFC, I do think that Arman Tsarukyan will capture that gold at some point. Inside the UFC welterweight division, I have Sean Brady. Sean Brady is one of the best fighters inside the welterweight division. I have been banging this drum for the longest time. When he fought Gilbert Burns, I was saying that Sean Brady's going to put up on a masterclass. He Kimura'd Kelvin Gastelum in that fight, and he beat Leon Edwards in a shutout against in UFC London, and had the most exciting grappling performance I have ever seen inside the UFC. Always getting position, showing high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, controlling Leon in every way, and throwing fire on him. Ended up getting the mounted guillotine submission in the second round, being the first person to ever finish Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards is very good. Sean Brady was showing that he is one of, if not the best grapplers in the UFC. You got someone like Khamzat Chimaev, you got someone like Kamaru Usman, I guess, and you got some really small guys, but I would take Sean Brady over Usman, and obviously Khamzat would be there, but like guys like Marab, you could take over Sean Brady, but Sean Brady is in that upper echelon of UFC greats who can grapple. Sean Brady is so good. He's got a great striking game to go with that, and I genuinely think that he's a nightmare matchup for almost every single person in the welterweight division. I think he beats Jack Della Maddalena. He's already lost to Bilal Muhammad, but I think he's gotten a lot better since then. I think he beats Bilal. I think he beats Shavkat. I think Kamaru Usman would be a very difficult fight for him. He beat Leon Edwards. I think he beats Ian Machado Gary. Michael Morales would be a tough fight. Beats Buckley, beats Covington, beat Burns, beats Neal, beats Prates, all those different guys. But Sean Brady is going to have a very tough road ahead of him with Islam Makhachev coming over, because that's also a very, very, very difficult fight. But Sean Brady's ground control, his grappling is some of the most dominant in UFC history, in my opinion. And I think that he is still a younger fighter in his UFC career. He's a very humble guy, just had a kid. He's fighting for his daughter now. And I think that that extra fire motivating Brady is going to allow him to achieve that UFC champion status at some point in his career prior to retiring. Now going into the UFC middleweight division, with the most annoying style you could ever possibly fight, I got Anthony Hernandez. Fluffy himself just went out there and ragdolled Roman Dolidze, and I think that he could beat any single person in the top part of the UFC middleweight division, that being Khamzat Chimaev included. Not saying he would beat Chimaev, but I do think he stands a chance. I do think that Khamzat would probably control him and submit him, honestly. But Fluffy Hernandez has one of the toughest styles in the UFC to fight. If you've never watched him, think about Merab a bigger Merab Davishvili, someone who never gets tired, someone who wrestles, absolutely babied Roman Dolidze in that last fight, beat Brendan Allen by decision, TKO'd Michelle Pereira, beat Roman Kapilov by submission at UFC 298. He's just an absolute dog out there, and I do think that Anthony Hernandez is only getting better. I see him beating someone like Adesanya. I see him beating someone possibly like Imavov. I see him possibly beating Kyle Bohayo, and I see him possibly beating someone like Dricus du Plessis. But really, Anthony Hernandez is going to have a very, very tough time in the middleweight division, considering it's one of the deepest divisions in the UFC currently. But Hernandez has the one thing that will stand out against the rest, and that is the unwavering cardio that he presents. Whenever you're fighting someone like Anthony Hernandez, Merab Davishvili, who have cardio like that, it is so hard to keep up with them, and they just drown you in that fight. And that is easily Anthony Hernandez's biggest asset. Roman Dolidze wanted the way out in that fight in the second round, and Anthony Hernandez was killing him, body lock tripping him, throwing down, ragdolling him. The mini Cain Velasquez out there in Anthony Hernandez is absolutely insane, and genuinely, I do think that he will become the UFC middleweight champion at some point. Moving to the light heavyweight division, I got Khalil Roundtree Jr. Now, the man who has never shot a takedown in the UFC, I'm not really worried about that, because the only guys who can grapple in that top part of the UFC light heavyweight division is the champion Magomed Ankalaev, who is a striker at heart, and Yuri Prochazka, who is known to throw some takedowns, as well as Jan Blachowicz. But Khalil Roundtree Jr. has knockout power, absolutely lightning in his hands, to where he has displayed some of the most absolutely breathtaking knockouts, absolutely starching some of the guys that he's fought, like Anthony Smith. But Khalil Roundtree Jr. just beat Jamal Hill in a very dominant one-sided fight. He's fighting Yuri Prochazka in his next one, and I genuinely think that Khalil Roundtree Jr. is someone who's only getting better over time. He's only created so many more different avenues for him to beat these guys. He's a very intelligent striker now. He might not have the most exciting game plans, namely that Jamal Hill fight, but he won that fight so dominantly that you can only give him props in that one. Striking, dropping Jamal Hill about 5 times in that fight. Genuinely, Khalil Roundtree Jr. is such a good fighter. Now, I wish he would implement some takedowns in his game, but he almost has a moral pact to himself that he would definitely not do that. But ultimately, when I'm looking at Mr. Khalil Roundtree Jr., I think he has a puncher's chance against every single person in the light heavyweight division, except the two, Magomed Ankalaev and Alex Pereira being at the top, but he definitely could beat them as well. Khalil Roundtree Jr. will become UFC champion before his UFC career ends. And going to the UFC heavyweight division, I want to make it clear no one's beating Tom Aspinall anytime soon, but if I had to pick someone, I'm going to say Jailton Almeida. He's still younger in his UFC career. He is a great grappler, which is an absolute anomaly inside the UFC heavyweight division. The only guys who can grapple there are Curtis Blaydes, who's a good wrestler, obviously Tom Aspinall, who has some submissions and has a background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that's really it. Jailton Almeida ragdolled Derek Lewis. He absolutely face-planted Curtis Blaydes in that first round of that fight. And really, he has some incredible wins with his grappling. He's going to be taking on Alexander Volkov in his next one, and I do think that he could possibly out-grapple him to get a win in that fight. But Jailton Almeida has been known as one of the more boring fighters inside the heavyweight division, but that grappling that he possesses is something that is going to take him very far, considering that not many of the other individuals inside the heavyweight division will be able to hold a candle to that, except someone like Curtis Blades, who was able to stuff him and kind of put him off to the side and ultimately get the finish, and Tom Aspinall, who is one of the best heavyweight grapplers we've seen in a very long time, even though he's more namely known for his striking. But Jailton Almeida has a chance to become UFC champion sometime in his career. I genuinely think that right now the heavyweight division is ruled by an iron fist, with Tom Aspinall being up top. I don't think anyone's going to take that belt, like I've said, anytime soon. But if I had to pick one person, Jailton Almeida has the most different skill set, being a grappling specialist, to where he can take down and submit a lot of these UFC heavyweights, leading him to be heavyweight champion in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please let me know what you think down below in the comments about these guys. Starting at Flyweight, I got Tatsuro Taira. Going to Bantamweight, I have Umar Nurmagomedov. Featherweight, I got Jean Silva. Lightweight, Arman Sarukian. Welterweight, Sean Brady. Middleweight, Anthony Hernandez. Light heavyweight, I got Khalil Roundtree Jr. And in the heavyweight division, I got Jailton Almeida. It's really hard to make these predictions, saying that who will become UFC champion at one point or another. I do think that Jailton Almeida is going to get a title shot pretty soon if he beats Alexander Volkov. I do think that Umar is 1 or 2 wins away from getting a title shot. Sean Brady's a win away to get a title shot. Arman could deserve a title shot right now. Anthony Hernandez is probably a win away. Obviously, someone like Jean Silva is a win away, but genuinely, I think the UFC right now is in really good hands. We got a lot of good up-and-coming fighters, and all of these different guys inside the UFC's divisions can all become champion, especially these ones I named. I think they all have some great skills, some great things to set them apart from their competition, and will really be able to go out there and ragdoll their opponents in one way or another. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please let me know what you think down below in the comment section about this video, and what you guys want to see in the very near future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.